Ah, yes, because when I board the boat of the Jungle Cruise ride, I too think of Metallica. I'm gonna be honest with you, readers. Despite Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson being involved, I don't know if anyone was really eager to watch this live-action Jungle Cruise movie. As you know, it's the latest live-action film that was inspired by one of their oldest rides present at the Disneyland theme park. And ever since the success of Pirates of the Caribbean, Disney has been trying to replicate said success with other theme park ride-inspired productions, such as Brad Bird's Tomorrowland starring George Clooney, and 2003's Haunted Mansion with Eddie Murphy, which is now being remade with Lakeith Stanfield and helmed by Dear White People series and movie creator and director Justin Simien. Ooh, that's gonna be interesting. Now, part of what piques my interests in these movies is seeing how they weave an engaging narrative that fits the theme, despite how basic the rides that serve as the inspirations for them are. Trust me, I've rode the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and while I can see what inspired the Cursed Gold plot in it, the very nature of the ride would have caused me to not associate any of the elements into a plot of a story out of sheer boredom alone. But just like they did with Pirates, Jungle Cruise took a pretty simple tourist gimmick ride and turned it into a surprisingly long, yet admittedly entertaining Indiana Jones clone. Because honestly, I can't really bring myself to agree with the people who say that the movie is a copy of The Mummy when the only similarities are the brother and sister dynamic that Lily and McGregor share with Evie and Jonathan. And one of the elements that played a very creative and intriguing factor into it was Dwayne Johnson's character Frank and his overall connection to the MacGuffin the trio were seeking. However, considering what said connection turned out to be, along with how the relationship was formed between himself and Emily Blunt's Lily over the course of their interactions, the situations surrounding the plot, premise, and the overall players in question, considering the period the movie took place in, could have been expanded upon a whole lot more if Disney weren't afraid to put respectability politics to the side. Now, before I continue, I just want to let it be known that I'm going to be talking about Jungle Cruise in ways that'll spoil the movie for people from here on out. So if you haven't seen the movie yet and you don't want to be spoiled, I highly recommend you either go see it in theaters or do your inner debate regarding whether or not it's worth the additional 30 plus to watch on Disney Plus. Cool? Cool. So, if you have seen Jungle Cruise, then you know that Lily, her brother McGregor, and their guide Frank are after the Tears of the Moon, flower petals from a legendary tree located in South America that can cure any sickness, disease, and lift any curse. Because this movie takes place during the events of the Great War, aka World War I, that lets us know exactly how old this legend is. And because of how old said legend is and the fact that it's located in South America, more than likely, the Spanish conquistadors were involved in some form, shape, or fashion. Turns out, that's exactly the case. A conquistador named Don Aguirre led an expedition to find the tears in order to save the life of his daughter, and was cursed alongside his companions for the pillaging, desecration, and murder of the tribe sworn to protect it. You know, traditional colonizer things. Hashtag just colonizer things. Now, this exposition is obviously used as a setup for one of the film's supernatural opposing forces to the heroes, who are freed by German Prince Joachim, the film's primary antagonist. However, it also factors into Frank's backstory and surprise twist, because an hour and a half into the movie, we find out that Frank is actually Francisco Lopez de Heredia, Don Aguirre's adopted brother, and also one of the conquistadors cursed to be bound to the river for all eternity. But despite being cursed alongside the rest of them, Frank developed a different perspective than Aguirre during his time with the natives. He saw their humanity versus the mentality colonizers of yesteryear had when it came to the places and people they conquered. He noticed said shifts in Aguile's behavior when he saw the villagers as a means to an end and made the active decision to fight for them and against his kin, despite being cursed alongside them for being guilty by association. Yet, despite being afflicted by the same curse, he continued to fight against his fellow conquistadors who sought the tree to free themselves until trapping them in a way that would immobilize them indefinitely from being away from the river for so long. So, despite the main story taking place in the early 20th century, because of the inclusion and involvement of the Spanish conquistadors in a story about a legendary MacGuffin centered around South America, initially chronicled in the 16th century, the topic of colonization can't help but be associated and embedded within the very narrative of Jungle Cruise. In a way, displaying Aguile's mentality and actions against the South American natives shows the supremacy and superiority that colonizers displayed over indigenous people when such levels of xenophobia were the norm amongst certain kingdoms and ethnic groups. And because of the actions of Frank, who, despite being cursed alongside them, fights to protect both the villagers and the Tears of the Moon from his fellow immortalized kin, he represents an individual who is exposed to the terrors his own people brought upon those they deemed lesser, but doesn't turn a blind eye to it because he's uncomfortable with the truth. Instead, he accepts and acknowledges both his condemnation and role played in said injustice, and utilizes his privilege in ways to make sure that the history of violence and cultural desecration ends with him. But it's like I stated earlier, readers, the topic of colonization is heavily embedded into the story of Jungle Cruise based on the very extent the Spaniards played in the backstory of the film's plot, including the acknowledgement of how Frank's choices to redeem himself in the eyes of the South American natives can serve as an allegory for allyship in the face of coming to terms with the problematic past of one's nation and or people. And as we all know, especially now that actions have been made to eliminate the romanticization of certain individuals who were previously given national holidays, the past actions of Spaniards are, in fact, worthy of criticism and judgment, especially in the form of fictional media. My problem with Jungle Cruise, however, is that while all of that is true, the Spaniards are not the only colonizers present in the movie that are worthy of receiving the film's narrative criticism. In fact, said colonizers aren't given the same treatment as the Spaniards at all, in which their attempts and misdeeds are completely ignored because of the association of two of its main characters. The irony of the situation is that this isn't the first time that Disney has done this. You see, ever since The Chronicles of Narnia: Prince Caspian, despite it being an adaptation of the novel of the same name, Disney has utilized the Spanish conquistadors as their go-to historical representatives for the dangers of colonization and cultural erasure. And while acknowledging the Spanish conquest of Latin America in media is absolutely necessary in order to show just how much damage the nation did to Latin natives and is historically accurate according to the time of the live-action Disney movies that they take place in, they are also the only nation known for colonialism in the past that is properly depicted as such. The European country of Great Britain, however, or as it's currently known now as the United Kingdom, is always seen in a less negative light, despite having the same history. And it's not like Jungle Cruise is the first time Disney has properly utilized and depicted the Spanish conquistadors as villains and antagonistic forces in their original narratives either. The role they played in Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides when they find the Fountain of Youth still makes me want to do Pai Mei's exploding heart technique on a casual bigot to this day.
Only God can grant eternal life, not this pagan water.
They destroyed the Fountain of Youth because God was jealous.
However, in comparison, every attempt by Disney to display Britain's passive colonization has been tremendously watered down, the easiest examples being the animated films surrounding Pocahontas. Not only were they ridiculously romanticized versions of her meeting with John Smith and later traveling to London with John Rolfe in the sequel Journey to a New World, but the truth regarding what happened to the Native Americans when the first British settlers arrived and how Pocahontas was actually treated was replaced with the notion of only a few bad apples, explaining the xenophobia and racism that were present, a la Governor Ratcliffe, the villain of both films. And the Pirates of the Caribbean movies are no better, providing very little about Britain's occupation on the islands outside of a way of using it to explain why the main cast of characters of the main trilogy and its two spin-off films were white Brits. A theory I have regarding why I believe Disney doesn't allow its filmmakers to go hard in checking the UK on their colonialism days like they do with Spain is pretty much white guilt and what that means to their bottom dollar in the box office sales. They immediately get uncomfortable when they are forced to deal with the actions of or feel firsthand the pain and humiliation systemic racism established by their ancestors firsthand. So much so that they'd rather do anything but acknowledge said past and learn from it in order to disassociate from said action and not have that weight on their shoulders. So you know, Texas. If you've seen any lecture taught by anti-racism activist Jane Elliott, then you've seen firsthand how some white Americans handle white guilt when they're forced to deal with the crimes of their ancestors. And due to Disney's sloppily handled take of trying to change the narrative of the story of Pocahontas, I wouldn't be surprised if they're trying to avoid that altogether by painting one of the most notorious nations of colonizers still in existence in a more neutral light. Or, in the case of Jungle Cruise, having them be too busy dealing with other important social justice battles that were prominent at the time in order to address it. However, because we can all agree about the way Spain handled its takeover of Mexico and South America, along with the world clearly gaining a better grasp of accepting that Christopher Columbus was a full bitch, Spanish conquistadors became Disney's antagonistic representatives for not only colonialism and cultural defamation, but also, in the case of Jungle Cruise, an outlet for displaying the long-term effects of a people's persecution of another without making white people feel uncomfortable with themselves. So while Frank, being a Spaniard named Francisco who was cursed with immortality, doing what he can to make up for the violent actions of his brother and his fellow cursed conquistadors, is a fine allegory in properly utilizing your privilege, the problem is that he is the only one trying to make amends for the violent actions his fellow Spaniards and himself delivered to the natives of the Amazon, when it's clear by the very existence of Emily Blunt's character Lily that he shouldn't have to be. The search for the tears of the moon in order to incorporate it into medicine could have been her way of trying to make amends for the years of hurt and destruction that her nation has bestowed upon the world. Hell, we could have learned that her father, the one who informed her of the legend in the first place, could have easily been involved with slave trade or the deforestation of national wildlife of the countries claimed for the crown. Which would explain why she's always so anxious to free animals from cages whenever she encounters them.
Lady, leave the monkeys. The monkeys are fine.
Add the fact that her family did all but disown McGregor for being gay and not marrying into a rich family, and it would have added more fuel to the fire regarding why she needed to find the tears, which would in turn help the dynamic between Lily and Frank more than what we received. Two individuals either knowing of or participated in the desecration of a people by their own and doing what they can in their own way in order to make amends. When it comes to colonialism, choosing the Conquistadors as the one to get the plot moving, while justified, feels a bit lazy when Disney constantly uses the English, or at least English individuals, as a force for good in the face of a rather neutral, albeit sexist, nation considering the time it takes place in. If Disney wasn't so afraid of unintentionally, yet justifiably so, calling out a specific demographic for their past actions the way that they've proven to be so eager to do so with one that's currently popular to call out thanks to modern day awareness, Jungle Cruise could have been so much more than just an okay and entertaining Indiana Jones clone that probably won't even get a sequel because of how Frank finally received his redemption. Instead, it's now just a one-and-done theme park attraction adaptation where a person of color has been tasked with the responsibility of taking on the burden of white guilt so that white people don't have to. Also, The Rock is black and Samoan. He's not even Spanish, y'all. Make it make sense. But I digress, readers. Your homework assignment for the day. Write in the comment section below what you thought of Disney's Jungle Cruise if you've seen it. Or if you feel like sharing with the rest of the class a movie that you've seen that had every opportunity to rightfully critique the actions of an Anglo-Saxon nation, but doesn't due to white guilt. Whichever question you decide to answer, I'd love to know your thoughts. I am looking forward to the comment section on this fucker. Yes! If you want to help financially support the channel, you can join my Patreon by clicking the card at the end of the video or in the link in the description down below, where you can also find a link to my merchandise store. Or if you prefer to give a one-time donation, you can find links to my PayPal and my Ko-fi account in the description box as well. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because I post new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. But until then, this is Readus 101. Class dismissed.